Welcome to the Deep Dive, your shortcut to being well-informed. Today, we're jumping into something really quite mind-bending from the late 19th century.
We certainly are.
We're exploring the scientific study of phenomena like trance, muscle reading, and, well, other related nervous states that were pretty mysterious back then.
Absolutely. It was a fascinating period.
And our guide for this deep dive is the work of Dr. George M. Beard, specifically his really important 1882 publication.
A key text, definitely.
So our mission today is to kind of unpack Beard's insights and see how these, frankly, sometimes bizarre-sounding occurrences actually tell us fundamental things about our nervous system.
And maybe even about how we perceive things, how belief works.
Exactly. Okay, so let's start at the beginning. What was going on, scientifically speaking, around 1882? Why this sudden focus on things like trance and muscle reading? They'd often been dismissed before, right, as parlor tricks or something else.
Yeah, that's a great question. There really was what Beard called a new departure and a positive advance, especially in psychological circles in Europe, looking into these exact things.
A new departure.
Right. But the key thing, and this is important, wasn't so much brand new earth-shattering discoveries. It was more about confirming things found earlier.
Ah, okay. Validation.
Exactly. And maybe even more crucially, just the diffusion of this knowledge. It was spreading through the scientific community. You know, you see this explosion in papers being published.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Dr. Paul Julius Mobius, for instance, he compiled a list, 92 papers on these topics. And get this, over 2/3 of them came out in just the 3 years, right before 1882.
Wow, that's a huge spike.
It tells you the interest was deepening, spreading really fast. The scientific world was finally ready to take it seriously, you know?
That makes sense. So not necessarily brand new ideas, but a new willingness to really dig in and share the findings. So with all this activity, who was really leading the charge? Was Beard just part of this wave, or did he see himself differently?
Oh, Beard definitely saw himself differently. He made some very strong claims of priority.
He did.
Yes. He basically said that he and a Mr. Braid had already solved and the whole subject organized in a science years before these newer French and German experiments even got going.
So he felt he was way ahead.
He did. Beard saw his specific contribution as taking it all from what he called a territorial stage, kind of scattered observations, into an organized stage, a proper science, by 1877.
Right.
And he wasn't shy about criticizing researchers like Mobius and Richer in Europe. He felt they just weren't aware of the work he'd already done and published years earlier over here in America.
Okay, so he's staking a pretty major claim there. It sounds like he had some really specific ideas about trance that he thought were, well, revolutionary.
Yeah.
What were his key contributions?
Yeah, he laid out 3 core points, which he himself called original and peculiar. They were really the foundation of his approach.
Okay, what's the first one?
First was the identity of trance varieties. He argued that what people called hypnotism, you know, artificial trance, was basically just inducing a natural trance state artificially.
So no fundamental difference.
None, according to Beard. He said all the varieties, natural or artificial, were essentially the same thing, driven by one underlying principle. He showed how similar the effects were regardless of how the trance started.
Interesting. Okay, what was number 2?
Second was psychological induction. This was pretty radical. Beard claimed that to induce artificial trance, nothing was necessary except acting on the subject's emotion of expectation.
Just expectation, not magnets or passes or anything physical.
Exactly. He completely dismissed things like Mesmer's animal magnetism. For Beard, artificial trance was a purely psychological phenomenon. It needed a psychological explanation, not some mysterious physical force.
I must have ruffled some feathers.
Oh, absolutely. And his third principle was the concentration theory. This was his big idea, the one he said explained and unified everything.
The grand theory.
Right. It harmonized all kinds of trance, natural, artificial, didn't matter how they were induced. It brought, as he put it, order out of chaos.
And did he think this just applied to humans?
No, and that's interesting too. He firmly believed these principles applied to lower animals as well as to man. He saw it as biologically fundamental, and he wasn't just theorizing. He actually demonstrated things like trance confessions, trance muscle reading, even trance seeing, to back it up.
Okay, so he's saying it's basically all in the mind, triggered by expectation. That is quite a shift from the earlier ideas.
A huge shift.
And you mentioned muscle reading there. This seems like another area where Beard really made his mark. Let's unpack that. What exactly is muscle reading, a term he coined?
Right, muscle reading. It's pretty much what it sounds like. It's the ability to detect through physical contact, usually the hands, these incredibly slight, delicate muscle movements, tensions, and relaxations.
Unconscious movement.
Totally unconscious. They result from the mind or body focusing on something like a location or an object without the person even realizing you're doing it.
And how does that connect to trance?
Well, Beard said it had a dual relation to trance. The emotional excitement often involved in these demonstrations could actually put both the person doing the reading, the operator, and the subject into a light, sort of trance-like state, what he called a tranquil state.
Oh, okay. So the heightened emotion helps.
It seems to enhance the sensitivity, perhaps? The body subtly gives away the secret without conscious awareness.
And the person who really put this on the map, publicly anyway, was Brown, the mind reader.
Mm-hmm.
Tell us about him. How did his performances actually help science, even though he wasn't a scientist?
Brown's act was simple, but incredibly effective, baffling people. He'd be blindfolded, hold the subject's hand, and the subject would think of a place, maybe where they hit a pin or a pea.
Okay.
Brown would then, guided by these tiny unconscious muscle tensions from the subject, find the location. And crucially, when he got there, he'd sense a relaxation in the muscles.
So he found the spot, but not necessarily what was at the spot.
Exactly. He found the locality, not the nature of the object. Beard made this really interesting comparison between Brown and Mesmer.
Oh, yeah.
He called them both sincere non-experts. They did amazing things they couldn't explain themselves, but, and this is Beard's point, their performances were hugely valuable to science because they provided clear phenomena that scientists could then study and explain.
So they generated the data, essentially.
In a way, yes. But Beard drew a distinction. Mesmerism, he said, was the amusement of the masses. Mind reading, though, became the scholar's delusion. It fooled educated people, too.
Interesting distinction.
And here's a key difference. Muscle reading was basically explained scientifically in less than 6 months. Mesmeric trance took nearly a century to really figure out.
Wow, less than 6 months. That's incredibly fast.
Relatively speaking, yes. It shows how quickly a concrete, physical explanation could take hold once proposed.
Which brings us to a real climax in this story. Yeah. The showdown at Yale. Beard versus the faculty, challenging mind reading on his home turf. What happened there? Especially with reports saying the Yale professors were actually buying into it.
It was quite dramatic. This was October 22nd, 1874. Reports were flying that top Yale people, Professor Brewer, Professor Lyman, even the former President Woolsey, seemed convinced by Brown's demonstrations. Some experiments were apparently done through 200 feet of wire.
Through wire? How would that even work with muscle reading?
Well, exactly. That detail fueled the idea. It wasn't just physical contact. The public definitely saw it as a scientific thumbs up for mind reading. Beard himself wasn't keen on a big public show. He wanted controlled experiments. But he agreed to the contest mainly to get that chance to test Brown privately.
Sneaky.
Yeah.
Okay, so what was the atmosphere like?
Intense. You had over 1,000 people, mostly described as intelligent non-experts, and Beard said there was a clear bias. They cheered Brown's hits and were dead silent for his misses.
Okay, so the pressure was on. How did Brown do?
Interestingly, the first few experiments that night didn't go well. Beard suspected maybe just hinting at the muscle theory made the subjects unconsciously resist or become too self-aware.
Ah, the observer effect, almost.
Sort of. But then later in the evening, Brown started producing really stunning results. Found a penny in an empty seat, picked the letter P in a newspaper, chose the right vial out of 16.
Wow.
He even correctly located imaginary pain on someone, did a successful test seemingly through 2 people linked together, and marched right to a specific person picked out in the audience.
So pretty convincing stuff for the audience. What did the official committee say?
Their report was, well, ambiguous, very carefully worded. They said neither mind reading nor unconscious muscular action were definitively proved by the experiments of that evening.
Hedging their bets.
Completely. Beard later pointed out he'd only suggested the muscle theory at that point. He hadn't actually demonstrated it during the contest itself.
Okay, so it sounds like maybe not the clear win Beard hoped for at that moment.
Yeah.
But you said there was a triumph afterward.
Yes. This is the clever part. After the ambiguous report, Beard basically told the audience, don't just take my word for it, or Brown's. Go home and try this yourselves.
Really? He just threw it out there.
He did. And what happened was amazing. Within weeks, reports came in of hundreds of mind readers popping up all over the place. People were trying it at home, finding pins, objects.
So it wasn't some unique power Brown had.
Exactly. This explosion of amateur successes was the real proof. It showed anyone could do it with a bit of practice, focusing on those tiny muscular cues. It kind of destroyed Brown before the public, as Beard put it. It demystified it completely.
That's brilliant, crowdsourcing the debunking.
Pretty much. People like Judge Blydenberg apparently got so good they could find the head of a pin just by touching the subject's finger. It showed it was a skill, not magic.
Okay, so Beard effectively won the argument in the U.S. through this mass demonstration. But you mentioned European researchers earlier. How did Beard's ideas eventually make it across the Atlantic? Was there a similar process there?
Well, it took a while. 7 years after Baird's main work, in 1881, muscle reading had a big revival in London. There was this performer, a Mr. Bishop, who was impressing everyone, even members of the Royal Society and the royal family.
So history repeating itself.
In a way. Prominent English psychologists, Professor Croom Robertson, George Romanes, Francis Galton, Professor Ray Lancaster, they all started investigating Bishop independently.
And what did they find?
They ran experiments, Bishop finding hidden objects, a matchbox behind a book, a pencil case up in a chandelier, or locating points on people's bodies. They noted some interesting errors, like confusing symmetrical parts of the body.
Suggesting physical cues again.
Precisely. Their conclusion was clear. Bishop was guided by unconscious muscular indications, not any kind of genuine thought reading, and they specifically noted he didn't seem to have abnormally sensitive touch.
So they reached the same conclusion as Beard, just later. Did they know about Beard's work?
This is where it gets interesting. Professor Robertson, once he actually received Beard's 1877 paper, publicly acknowledged Beard's priority in the journal Nature. He basically said, oops, if I'd known about Beard's much more extensive research, I wouldn't have wasted my time on Bishop.
So a communication breakdown, it seems.
It certainly looks like it. And there's a slightly puzzling element involving Dr. William B. Carpenter, a very well-known physiologist.
What did he do?
Well, Carpenter actually knew about Beard's research quite early, around 1877. He'd even asked Beard for his writings. Yet later, he seemed to imply to people like Professor Huxley that this whole muscle reading explanation was kind of a new thing discovered in London. And he encouraged others to study Bishop without fully briefing them on the prior American work.
That does sound a bit odd. Professional rivalry, maybe? Or just forgetting?
Hard to say for sure. Beard certainly implied there might have been some resistance to acknowledging American priority. It definitely highlights how science communication wasn't always smooth, even between top figures across the Atlantic.
Yeah, fascinating bit of scientific politics almost. Now, related to the scientific process, Beard had some strong opinions on how to treat the people being studied, didn't he?
Yeah.
Specifically about their moral character or trustworthiness.
He did. Very strong views, and quite controversial, perhaps. He argued that a subject's personal character, their honesty or morality, was totally irrelevant to the scientific value of the phenomena they demonstrated.
Irrelevant. How so?
He said he treated subjects as though they had no character at all, meaning he didn't rely on their word or their perceived integrity as proof of anything. He made this really sharp observation that often the worst cases of sham trance, people faking it, were found in individuals with, quote, unimpeached moral character.
So being a good person didn't mean you weren't unconsciously misleading or even deliberately faking.
Exactly. Sincerity wasn't the same as scientific accuracy for Beard. He actually praised researchers like Dr. Charcot in France, who famously worked with patients often described as emotional and wretched women at the Salpêtrière Hospital.
Why praise that?
Because, Beard argued, Charcot was able to demonstrate genuine physiological phenomena with these subjects. It proved that you could get clear, true, pure scientific results regardless of the subject's background or perceived character, just like a chemist gets results from inanimate elements.
So focus on the phenomena, not the person.
Precisely. It tied into his broader idea of non-expertness. He saw this tendency for humans to misinterpret, to be unconsciously influenced, or even to deceive without meaning to, as universal. He compared it to smallpox. It affects everyone's reasoning, everywhere, regardless of who they are. It's a fundamental challenge in studying human testimony.
That's a powerful analogy. So pulling back to the bigger picture then, beyond just cracking the code on trance and muscle reading, what were the broader takeaways from Beard's work? What did it tell us about the nervous system or even about how we evaluate evidence?
Well, His work helped confirm links between various nervous phenomena that might have seemed unrelated. You mentioned the main jumpers earlier, people with this extreme startle reflex.
Hmm.
Beard saw this as related, a kind of trancoidal state, very ticklish, and pointed out similar things were seen as far away as South Africa and even in animals like guinea pigs.
Showing a common underlying nervous mechanism.
Exactly. He also explored things like trance seeing, suggesting that under certain altered states, general bodily sensation could almost substitute for specific senses like sight. But perhaps the most profound impact was on the understanding of evidence itself.
How so?
His work, he felt, had radical and revolutionary implications for how we should evaluate human testimony in science, in law, everywhere. He was pleased to see his ideas echoed independently by major figures like Professor Wundt in Germany, who was also writing about the scientific study of human testimony. It was about recognizing the inherent fallibility and biases in observation.
Right, the non-expertness affecting everyone. So, okay, this is all fascinating history and theory, but what's the practical point? Why does delving into 19th century studies of trance matter today? What good comes from it?
Beard had a clear answer to that, echoing the surgeon Sir James Paget. He believed these kinds of deep dives into the nervous system make us wiser, more skillful, and more successful. Not just in understanding and treating specific neuroses or nervous disorders, but potentially in understanding all other forms of disease because the nervous system is so interconnected with everything. He also stressed the huge medico-legal importance.
Medico-legal, like in court cases.
Exactly. He mentioned high-profile trials of his time, like Cadet Whittaker or the Assassin Guiteau, where questions of trance states, psychological influence, or mental state were central, either for the defense or prosecution. Understanding these phenomena was critical.
So, real-world consequences.
Definitely. And Beard was ultimately optimistic. He saw the field moving past cold indifference and hot opposition into a new phase, contests of priority, like the ones he was engaged in. He felt this actually signaled progress, inviting the highest expertness of both hemispheres to engage and refine the science. For him, the scientific march forward was inevitable.
Well, this deep dive into Dr. George M. Beard's 1882 work has certainly been revealing. We've journeyed through a really key moment in understanding the mind and body.
Absolutely.
Seeing how things once dismissed as pure mind reading or delusion were meticulously broken down and explained through unconscious physical actions, through muscle reading.
And how Beard aimed to unify all these disparate nervous phenomena under broad principles like psychological induction and concentration.
It really underscores how the human mind and body remain this incredible source of mystery, but also, thankfully, of ongoing scientific inquiry.
It does, and maybe the most enduring takeaway, thinking about today, is just witnessing that relentless scientific drive to find objective truth, even when faced with stuff that seems utterly baffling or convincing on the surface.
That's a great point.
It kind of leaves you wondering, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm.
In our own age, with so much information, so many new claims, things that seem inexplicable, how do you personally tell the difference between genuine insight and maybe just that powerful emotion of expectation shaping what you perceive?